Many fly anglers start in freshwater and eventually add saltwater at some point. But the transition isn't always smooth, and today's guest is a freshwater and saltwater guide and runs schools in the northeast part of the country. And today you're going to get some of his best tips on fishing the flats of Cape Cod and the tailwaters of the northeast so you can more easily make that transition to saltwater. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, how's it going? I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid, grew up around a little fly shop, and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. George Sylvestre, a guide in Massachusetts, is going to walk us through his fishing program throughout the year. You're going to get his top 3 differences between fresh and saltwater and how to prepare for these changes. You're also going to discover how to find and hook fish on the flats out in northeast in Cape Cod and around the arm. And also we're going to get some great casting tips and some other tips and tricks along as we go. Plus you're going to get a few bonus tips today on the northeast and fishing winter midges and tailwaters. It's all here today, plus a little history. Here he is, George Sylvestre from sylvestreoutdoors.com. How you doing, George?
I'm great, Dave. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for making time today to put this together. We're going to talk, I think, today, all things, Massachusetts, a state we haven't really dug into specifically. We've been all around the East Coast, but I think that's one state that we haven't dug into. We're also going to talk some salt, probably some fresh, and just everything else you have going at Sylvestre Outdoors. So yeah. Well, first off, how are things going? What are you up to this time of year? It's kind of, as we're talking, it's early February. This episode's probably going to go live in March. So what's been going on?
Well, when Mother Nature allows us, we're still doing freshwater trips. We've got some great tailwaters out in the western part of the state. Mother Nature hasn't been all that cooperative lately, Dave, to be honest with you. It's pretty cold here. So, like most fly anglers, I'm tying flies, filling up the fly boxes, getting my gear ready, actually tearing apart one of the boats and trying to put it back together again. And we're actually now starting to promote a saltwater fly fishing school that we just kind of kicked off. It's going to have its first session in May. So pretty busy with that. And this time of year, with a little bit more downtime, I could spend a little time, in the gym. I try to spend some time training jiu-jitsu.
Oh, wow.
Which is kind of a cool hobby of mine that I think has some surprising similarities to fly fishing. But yeah, just trying to pass the time, be on the water as much as we can and get ready for the salt season.
Nice. And is the saltwater school, what does that entail? How does this school, we do some of our own schools, but how is that different? Maybe describe that a little bit.
Sure. It's called the Cape Cod School of Saltwater Fly Fishing. And we actually have 2 formats. We run an intensive 2-day school where students come in. They're going to get all sorts of techniques, tactics, discussion of target species, and a whole lot of casting instruction that takes up 2 days. We have a great group of folks coming in May. And we also do what we call 90 mini clinics. And we do them in a series of 5. It takes folks, through the very beginning of saltwater fly fishing, casting, the tackle, the techniques, all the way through in the end of the 5th in the series, sort of more advanced techniques. And the idea with both of these formats is that as students come in, we're introducing them. As they leave, we're wishing them good luck, and they're ready to go out and really sort of get after it on the salt.
Gotcha. Go after it. When you're getting into that, do you find you have a mix of kind of people that are brand new experience? What's that look like?
We have folks that maybe some folks are brand new to fly fishing. Other folks have some experience on the salt. And we do have a lot of folks that tend to come from the trout world and are interested in salt. And our philosophy is just to meet every student right where they are, have, a good understanding through a discussion with them of what their goals are, and then really do the best we can to get them from where they are, wherever they're starting, right to, that sort of angling experience that they want to have.
That sounds great. And what is when you get into it, if you have somebody that's new coming from the trout and what's the biggest challenge? I guess is the casting, or are there other big challenges?
Yeah, I actually do this whole presentation I've been doing at fly shops recently. It's really focused on the difference between freshwater and saltwater fishing. And I'd say there's a few things. Certainly casting. It's not to say that there's never wind over freshwater, but there's almost always wind over saltwater, right? So specifically focusing on casting techniques that will help an angler deal with the wind. Distance, is another aspect I think that's pretty different between fresh and salt. So working on that double haul, working on some accuracy at longer distances. And this is something, Dave, it gets me every time when I transition from the fresh to the salt is sort of, the old trout set versus strip set. And it's probably when I'm on the salt, probably the number one reason for fish not making it to the boat. So we really try with this sort of transition from fresh to salt to show anglers, the skills that you have on freshwater are useful and we can build on those, but there's some important differences. And we really encourage people to sort of understand what those differences are. And more importantly, practice before you get out on the salt. It's going to make your salt trip so much more worthwhile.
Nice. What is if you had to pick, say, the biggest differences between trout, like if you were to have a headline, the top 5 differences between the two, how would you say there's 5 or is there more like 20?
There's probably more like 20, but I would say, things like you've got to be able to deal with wind in any direction. In freshwater, we're making some aerial mends that help to get that fly to really dead drift, fly first down a current seam. So we use slack when we cast. In the salt, slack is not your friend at all, right? Because the wind is going to do whatever it's going to do with that. So casting without slack and really techniques to not only reduce slack, but increase line speed. And then I think maybe if I just sort of pick the top 3 in the salt, we're always, I think, very focused on staying in contact with the fly. When that fly hits the water, you need to be ready to strip, in some cases, right away. In some cases, even have anglers strip before the fly hits the surface of the water, which, in the freshwater, you're using a different technique. You're letting the river sort of move the fly. In saltwater, you really need to impart action into the fly. So yeah, I guess those would be my top 3.
Yeah, that's huge. So that's a big difference. So those are definitely a few key differences. We're going to talk more about this today. I think we wanted to kind of tee this up so people understand your program. We'll obviously have links out to your website as well, but let's get in more. I want to talk too, because you not only do salt, but you do some trout stuff. Maybe we can start high level with Massachusetts, kind of the area you are. Talk about what are the opportunities like in Mass? Is this different from a lot of the surrounding northeastern states, or is it very similar to, say, if you pick any of the northeast states, what you offer?
I'd say it's similar in nature, but of course I'm biased, so I'm going to say it's probably better. And I think the best part of it, and this is not unique just to Massachusetts, but it's really, Dave, it's the diversity of fly fishing that you can experience. Let's say we start all the way out west and we're fishing rivers like the Deerfield, which is a great tailwater, a place that we spend time this time of year. That place fishes great, honestly, all throughout the year. You've got brown trout and rainbow trout. You can pick up some brook trout. If you go even farther down, more sort of the central part of Massachusetts, the Deerfield itself turns into a great smallmouth river, which I think is kind of an incredible opportunity for folks to experience different species of fish, even on the same river over the course of the year. We also have a bunch of great freestone rivers. There's one that we fish that I, in particular, am really fond of. It's called the Miller's River. And that river, as opposed to the Deerfield, I would call it a more technical river. All right. I call it technical and moody because as a freestone, it's really more susceptible to variations of water flow, temperature, things like this. So it's a place that you can really go and use almost every fly fishing technique that you'd like to try. There's dry flies. Certainly this time of year, we're going to go with small nymphs. In the fall, there's great streamer fishing. It's great because in one river over the course of a year, you can really practice whatever technique that you want and really try to work on it. So just 2 examples, I think, of some really nice rivers. There's a bunch of still water, some great reservoirs right here in the central part of Massachusetts that you can You can target all sorts of species, smallmouth, largemouth bass. Take your young kids out and hook some bluegills. Lots of fun there. And then, well, Dave, I mean, I wouldn't be truthful if I didn't say I was biased towards the salt. I mean, we've got just whether it's, the North Shore, which is that part of Massachusetts up towards Cape Ann, north of Boston, the South Shore, that area south of Boston, Boston Harbor.
Right, Boston Harbor. There's nothing more famous than Boston Harbor as far as just the history.
Yep, have some tea,
Right.
commemorate that. And I mean, there have been years where there's schools of monster stripers in there. And then, of course, my hometown of Cape Cod, it's a 70-mile sandbar with more than 400 miles of coastline to fish.
Wow.
And I contend, and I don't know, maybe I'm in the midst of it right now, but you could fish there your whole life and not fish everything.
Really?
It's a really unique fishery.
God, that's great. And is that what, I mean, you hear a lot about Cape Cod probably for a number of different reasons, but what is it about that is so unique? I mean, it looks unique. You look on the map. Is that all a natural, whatever that's called? Island. It's not island, but look, it sticks out.
Yeah, I think it's probably called the peninsula. And yes, I think it is all natural, probably formed through the ice ages and stuff like that. But, I think Cape Cod is probably, there's at least two big things that make Cape Cod great. One is accessibility, and the other is diversity. Accessibility, we're about 70 miles south of Boston, which is, depending on that infamous Boston traffic, maybe it's an hour, it might be 2 hours of travel, but not far at all. Lots of different kinds of places to stay, different venues for recreation, great restaurants. I think everybody kind of thinks about Cape Cod as a family vacation spot, which it is. But from a fishing perspective, I think this is where the diversity aspect comes in. I mean, from a fly angling point of view, we've got some really great species over the course of the year. Of course, the iconic striped bass, bluefish, which are probably an underrated species as far as fly angling is concerned. We get into August and we're visited by bonito, and then later on by false albacore. So you've got a diversity of species, but there's a diversity of terrain that I think makes it really interesting. Cape Cod Bay, the very southern part of Cape Cod Bay, has the Brewster Flats, which maybe not everyone is aware of, but it's actually the largest flat system in the Northern Hemisphere.
Oh, right. What would be the nearest town to this?
So starting on the western side, East Dennis, Sesswood Harbor, which is a place I go out in and out of quite a lot, really in the central part of the peninsula of Cape Cod. And it really kind of goes all the way through, the inside of the arm up into Eastham, even as far as Wellfleet. It's 12,000 acres of tidal area that you can walk out. You could park your truck at the beach parking lot, and you can walk maybe a mile and more on some of these big low tides, and just a huge area to fish. You do have to be careful though. There's about a 12-foot tide swing that comes in there. So low tide, you could be sanding on dry sand, and then 6 hours later, the top of the high tide, it could be 12 feet deep.
Wow.
So there's.
Is this in the Buzzards Bay? Is that what we're talking about here?
Well, no, actually, this is east of Buzzards Bay. Sort of, if you think about Cape Cod, like an arm that's curled up, fizzed at the top.
Yeah, it's like an arm that's flexing its muscle.
Yeah, so this area, the Brewster Flats, is really like where the bicep would be.
Oh, okay.
Of that arm on the northern side.
Okay, so you're on the inside. Yeah, you're on the Cape Cod Bay side, right?
Cape Cod Bay, exactly. Yeah, we call that the north side. And, even as much as I think Brewster Flats is iconic and interesting, and for all the right reasons, there's even more out there.
Even more. So that's pretty amazing, because you come down to it. So you can just take, Highway 6 or right in and just hop in there and hit for Brewster. And like you said, you got miles of flats essentially just explore. Is that how it works? Is it public? Is it all public water?
It's all public water. There are private beaches kind of interspersed along there, but the public access is really plentiful. There, you should have no trouble getting out on the flats at all.
Wow, cool. And then what would be like, how do you do it? Are you doing, what is your program when you're out there guiding? Are you doing as much guiding or is it more like the schools and clinics?
I'd say it's a mixture. In the beginning of the season, for sure, the majority of the work that we're doing is schools and clinics, and it's, getting folks ready to go out and fish for the season. In the season, and I think when we're talking about the north side, normally that's where we begin the season around about the middle of May as far as guiding is concerned. Those clinics, they'll sort of happen maybe last part of April into the first part of May, and they continue through the summer. But the concentration really is before the season gets started in mid-May. Mid-May, geez, we have some great spring tides that are wonderful to fish. There's a lot of water moving in and out. And so really what it is, it's waiting usually around about 2 hours before the bottom of the low tide. We'll fish through that, fish a little bit, sort of in the middle there, and then 2 hours on the incoming tide. And really what happens is that because of the water depth, you can walk the flats beginning around 2 hours before the bottom of the low. And as the water comes in, it really chases you back to the parking lot. So once once the tide turns, you've got about 2 hours to make it back, which makes for some terrific fishing.
Experience the waters of Bristol Bay at Togiak River Lodge, where fly fishing meets Alaska's rugged beauty. This is the place to complete the Alaska Grand Slam with all 5 salmon species, rainbow trout, Arctic char, and more, where each day offers a new Alaskan adventure. You can visit TogiakLodge.com right now to start planning your Bristol Bay experience with Togiak River Lodge. What species would you be getting off these flats?
So in the beginning of the year, it's stripers for sure. We have a big migration of stripers that they come through the Cape Cod Canal for the most part, and many continue north. They'll head into Boston Harbor and even points farther north. But there's a group that break off and sort of take a right-hand turn, and they take up residency in Cape Cod Bay. So those are the fish that we're really targeting, really the first part of the year.
And when is the first part of the year? What months would those be?
So we're looking at, middle of May in terms of some consistent fishing. And then, those stripers are in the bay for the most part through the course of the summer. But, I think around about July 4th, the water temperatures in Cape Cod Bay can get a little warm. And when they do, the level of dissolved oxygen goes down. And so what happens then is that we start to turn our focus on the south side of Cape Cod. So if you were to look again, there, you've got that flexed arm. You're looking at the bicep. That's Cape Cod Bay. If you go directly south off the elbow, if you will, of Cape Cod, there's this feature called Monomoy Island. And Monomoy Island has its own series of flats. They tend to fish pretty well, even into July, and that's because those flats are exposed to the Atlantic, right? So the water temperatures stay lower, generally speaking, than in Cape Cod Bay. But the feature of most interest, I think, down that way are these shoals that sort of extend from the elbow of Cape Cod all the way down to Nantucket Island, which is about 7 miles off the tip of Monomoy. And these shoals, they can really produce some amazing fishing. What happens is that we get these strong coast-wide currents. They travel along the coast, coast-wise, I guess I should say. And when those big currents come up against these giant mountains of sand, these shoals, they create standing waves, and which is like very visually cool to see, but it tends to really attract a lot of bait and therefore a lot of game fish. And that's where sort of we shift our focus there. Second, third week of June, really you're looking at stripers. From that point on, the bluefish tend to come in a little bit later. And then as we continue through the season, you get into the late part of August, early part of September, and we get those false albacore starting to show up. And that's a real party right there.
Right. So that's the false. Yeah. And when do those start coming in?
You can probably start to find them in the very western part of Cape Cod, sort of the last week of August. We're out on the boats, looking intently in anticipation that time. But really, I think it's probably the first part of September before they're there, in numbers, and that really that throws the entire fishing community into a frenzy at that point.
Oh, is that more of a frenzy than, because I've heard some things about the striper fishermen that are just kind of like living out of their van going for it. Do you have the same thing for the false albacore?
I really do think so. Yeah, we don't have the albies around for all that long, and I think because of that, people really focus on them very intently for that period of time. But for sure, I mean, I know guys that have lost their jobs, wrecked their boats, and strained their marriages for sure over that course of sort of September, October.
September is that when in the bay, like temperatures change back to the cooling down? Is that why that's good?
Yeah, that so September and October are a little bit like, Christmas, your birthday, and any other holiday you want to put together because yeah, you're right. So not only do we have on the south side the albies that show up, but you begin to start to see the southern migration of the striped bass, and they do come back onto the flats. They're swinging around the outside of Cape Cod, and they're in numbers and in size. And I think part of the reason it's such an exciting time to fish Cape Cod is that there's plentiful bait, and those bait have grown. They've become pretty mature, so you can throw some big flies and catch some big stripers. And yeah, it's a magical time of year for sure.
Wow. So that might be, if you're going to pick one week to go up there, you think maybe September, October might be the best.
That's what I would suggest. In fact, looking at my calendar, the month of September for 2025 was already fully booked before Christmas got here in 2024. So folks definitely they know when to come and they're focused on that time of year.
And are you pretty much for you when you're guiding? Are you out taking the boat around and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's a real mix. So we do a bunch of wading trips, primarily in the first part of the year. I also have a flat skiff, which I use up on Cape Cod Bay on those flats. It's tremendous casting platform. It's a great way to sneak around and change locations and find concentrations of fish. And then for the bigger water on the southern side of Cape Cod, I've got a Jones Brothers 1910 light tackle edition 20-foot center console. And that hull, I mean, it is the quintessential saltwater fly fishing boat, but I can personally vouch for that hull being just one of the best platforms of any boat that I've
Oh, right.
had.
Like so it's good in kind of rough waters and also good for the like a skiff style.
It is. I mean, it's really good. It makes 2 to 3 foot chop seem like it's almost not even there. It handles 3 to 4 feet of chop without any kind of problem at all. And one of the best parts about that Jones Brothers boat is that it can get into pretty skinny water. I mean, I can get into less than 2 feet of water with that boat. So it's kind of it's go anywhere, do it all kind of a platform.
Cool. So let's just imagine you had some open spots and we were heading out there in kind of end of September. Talk about that. What would that look like potentially? What would we expect? Let's say we were going to be out there for a few days.
Is a great mixture of approaches that we could take. One of my favorites is I usually leave out of Chatham, which is sort of right there at the elbow. And in the morning, albies will sort of surface feed, right? They don't feed in the dark. They need light. So normally what I like to do that time of year is pick up my clients in Chatham, and then we're going to head west down towards Hyannis, kind of hugging the coast. There's quite a bit of structure there. And what you'll find is schools of albies that are crashing bait at the surface. And man, they are fun to chase and they are really hard to catch. I mean, you might have a shot or two. They're here and they're gone. There's a group of folks that will do sort of the run and gun. They'll chase those schools around. I tend to try to identify a pattern because those schools will swim sometimes in a circular pattern, sometimes just some kind of identifiable pattern. And I kind of wait and let them come to me. we'll have a ton of fun doing that in the morning. And then as the sun comes up, those albies can be pretty picky. They've got some great eyesight. So at that stage, what I like to do is run out to the rips off of Monomoy. And from there, there's any number of species. You could run into, a big pile of bluefish on your way out to Monomoy and have a blast with those guys. I mean, pound for pound, one of the best fighting coastal fish that you can find up here. Make our way out to Monomoy and fish those rips. Certainly, there's plenty of big striped bass out there, but you can most definitely hook into albies as you're fishing the standing waves of the rips. And in fact, last year, we found those albies, for whatever reason, to be a little bit more difficult, a little trickier, a little pickier than your typical season of albies. So we tended to have the best luck for albies in those rips when we're sort of drifting, heavy flies on sinking lines low and across the tops of the shoals, and the albies would take them. And man, that's one heck of a fight right there.
Right.
It's kind of chaos, right? You're bouncing around and chop that's 2 or 3 feet, and the wind's blowing, and the albies taking you right to the end of your backing, and you're wondering what's going to happen next. It's pretty exciting stuff.
Are you kind of chasing them down in the boat when they're running?
There are definitely times when we have to chase them. I did that a few times last year. I'm not sure exactly why, but we had bigger albies last year than we've had in the past, some in the 10 to 12 pound range. And yeah, for sure, when you start to see the end of the backing coming up, you've got to get the boat in gear and try to chase that guy down a little bit.
And then and then the stripers, would you be out, say, in that same time, end of September? You mentioned off the tip there, would you be going out also on some flats and doing some of that?
For sure. Monomoy itself is this great island that forms a very unique ecosystem, and part of that ecosystem is a small area of flats called Great Flats, actually. And the stripers will go in there chasing bait, corralling them up against the shore in that shallow water. And there have been times where you can get into some of these small channels, and they look like a traffic jam on the Massachusetts Turnpike, just filled with stripers.
Yeah.
But it's a very dynamic environment. Again, there's a tidal swing is pretty steep there, not as steep as in the bay, but the currents that move through there really push a lot of water, in a lot of different directions. So again, something, if you're sort of wading the tidal flats of Monomoy, you got to be real careful out there.
Do you know a little about the kind of life history of stripers, like why they're coming in to the bay and kind of what they're doing and all that stuff?
Sure. Stripers they're, first of all, they're anadromous, right? You can find them in freshwater, you can find them in
Right.
saltwater. And I think kind of the life cycle of stripers that we pay most attention to, starts in their spawning time of year, which is coming up here pretty soon. And that takes place for the most part in Chesapeake Bay, in the Hudson River. There are other locations for sure, but as far as the population of stripers that visit Cape Cod, they're principally from Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, they are. So they're heading now. Chesapeake is south of there.
Yeah, sort of, Delaware, Maryland, Delmarva Peninsula.
Basically, they spawn in the spring and then they're heading up north after that.
They do, yeah. They spawn in the spring. They actually need mostly fresh water to spawn in. And then after that, what they're doing is they're basically chasing concentrations of bait north as the water temperatures warm. And as that bait moves north, so do the stripers. And there's actually a magazine here that publishes an online version that shows the migration of stripers up the East Coast in
Oh
sort
yeah.
of a heat map style. And it's interesting because everybody's sort of chattering about, where are they and how soon will they be here? But in terms of the striper migration, that they kind of come in at the Cape Cod area around the middle of May. They'll head, as far north as the Canadian Maritimes. We're lucky in Cape Cod because the stripers stay for the summer, which is not the case in all locations. And if you happen to fish maybe further south in New Jersey, there's a part of the summer where the temperature is warm enough that the stripers won't hang out there. but they do hang out all summer in Cape Cod, and that's pretty cool.
Right. Wow. So you have them all summer. So there, I bet there's that window where it's a little bit warm, so you're not really targeting them, but you got the, like you said, the June. Maybe you're taking a break in what, July, later July, August, kind of that period, then you're back to it.
And the sort of the warmer months in July and August, we're on the southern part
Oh, just hit
of,
the southern. Yeah.
yeah, it's incredible to me how much variation there is in water temperature down there between Cape Cod and Nantucket. It's kind of a funny story, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I remember this last year very clearly. It was the 14th of July, and I remember because it was very foggy, and I was listening to the radio frequency that all the guides use, and we're out there bobbing around in the middle of the fog, and one of the guides says, "Hey, look at your electronics and tell me if you're seeing what I'm seeing." The water temperature was 48 degrees on the 14th of July and it had something to do, I'm sure, with a variation of maybe the Gulf Stream or something like that. But it's the coldest temperature that any of us could remember happening in July. And, oddly enough, in a few days' time, the fog cleared, the sun came back out, and the water temperatures, bounced right back into the 60s and 70s. And it was just, it's kind of the way Cape Cod goes. Every day is something different, and that makes it both, challenging and exciting.
So it's always changing that. And so when it gets down to the cooler temperature, is that kind of the prime, like, is there a temperature that's like the perfect temperature for fishing, find these guys?
For sure. I think the preferred temperatures for stripers for feeding, anyways, is somewhere in the sort of middle 60s to middle 70s. But having said that, they will feed in cooler temperatures. I don't think that they'll feed much above sort of 74, 75. But I think they're sort of preferred. Where they like to hang out is sort of mid 60s, mid 70s.
Okay. And then in back to, I'm kind of going back to the flats because that's kind of interesting, I think. So
Yeah.
they're basically going on there to, like you said, they're pushing the bait in and trapping them essentially. What is it like when you're sitting there in the boat if you're kind of on the flats? Talk about how you're setting up for the fish and how you're kind of hooking into them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, on the boat, we're going to take into account, things like what's the direction of the wind, so we can, if we have the ability to set up a drift, over the top of a likely spot, and a likely spot is on the outgoing tide, where one of these estuaries empties out into Cape Cod Bay, and the reason that's a likely spot, and this is, in a way similar, I think, to fishing for trout in a river is that the marsh that's being drained through that estuary is really bringing all sorts of food from that marsh area out into the bay. And stripers, they want to be efficient in their use of energy, so they'll wait there. So a good drift on an outgoing tide takes advantage of the wind. Sometimes in early part of the year, we can catch a favorable southwest breeze, not too strong of a breeze, and just sort of let the boat very stealthily move over that area and have anglers cast into it. The thing about the flats is, I like to say, they're not flat.
Yeah.
They're a series of, channels and gullies and sandbars. So we try to be as stealthy as possible. I've got a trolling motor that I use, sort of to get from here to there when I don't have the outboard fired up. And I've also got, a polling platform. So once we find ourselves, sort of in that spot where we think fish will be, I'll put the trolling motor away and just pull that skiff right over the top of them if I can.
Gosh. So you have kind of this period we're talking about. And I mean, going back to the trout, so when do you, or maybe talk about that, why are you choosing trout versus the salt? Or is there one that you would, go all in? It sounds like the salt's pretty exciting. What brings you back to the trout stuff?
Well, by the time October, November comes around, the stripers have migrated south of us. And, I like to think about that time of year that trout, they need to get ready for the winter. So the anglers that I fish with are very happy to feed them and get them ready for the winter. So, and, to be honest with you, I personally just really like the variety. I like, during the salt season to really sort of fully concentrate, on what's going on out there. but over the course of the year, it's really nice to change it up. And I think, you know, there's certainly similarities, and you can carry some things across from fresh to salt and back the other way. But you learn stuff, I think, on the freshwater that you can bring over to the salt that's different, and vice versa. So it's a nice to change it up.
Yeah. Okay. And we've done a little bit, well, more than a little bit of some episodes on New York, which is kind of right there adjacent to
Yeah.
you. Is that just mainly you hear more about New York, you think, because it's a bigger state, there's more waters, more because you guys have a little history there too, like we said. But is kind of Massachusetts, do you feel like it's still kind of off the radar compared to some of the other ones?
I think you're making a good point. I do in a way. You hear the iconic stories of fishing stripers off of Montauk, and for all the right reasons, right? It's a beautiful place, and those fish in their southern migration just that's their highway, and so why not fish there? Um, I do think maybe Cape Cod is still yet a bit underrated, maybe, in my opinion. I think it ranks up there with some of the most world-class fly fishing fisheries that I can think of. Certainly different than fishing for, let's say, bonefish or tarpon or permit. But yeah, I in a way I'm glad that we can have this conversation and just sort of introduce people a little bit to fishing Cape Cod.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like I said, we've talked stripers and the albacore, but it's you kind of never get tired of it because it sounds like there's this addiction to it, like a lot of these species. So,
I've been doing it my entire life and I'm not tired of it yet. So
so have you now? Maybe take us back there a little bit. Let's go big picture. You've been fly fishing for quite a while here? Like when did that get started?
yeah, I was really fortunate growing up. My hometown is a place called Stonington, Connecticut. It's right on Fisher's Island Sound. My grandparents were next door neighbors and they both lived on the water. So I spent my growing up time on the water. I had this grandfather. He was just a real central part of my life. And he, when he wasn't working, he was fishing and he introduced me to fly fishing because he was kind of curious. He's mainly a bait fisherman, but he was curious about fly fishing and I would follow him around everywhere. I just wanted to be him. So I did everything that he did. And when I was 9 years old, he took me to a yard sale and bought me a fly rod. And, I think over the course of time, we explored fly fishing, but neither of us really had enough patience for it, right? We just wanted to get out there and chase mainly bluefish at that point in time. And then, you know, time goes by and, I grew up and started a career and started a family and all that sort of stuff. And, it's a little bit of a funny story. At one point I was pretty deep into golf
Hmm.
and, I had some injuries that I had sustained when I was in the army, and eventually, they caught up with me. It kind of ended my golf career, and I was kind of looking around. What am I gonna do next? And a college buddy of mine said, "Hey, I'm taking a trip to the Catskills. Would you want to join me?" And it was kind of never looked back, from that point, and have gotten, I think, you never touch bottom because there's always stuff to learn,
Right.
but it's kind of at this point, it's consumed my entire life. It's how I make my living. It's kind of all I think about and dream about at night. So.
Right, right. That's awesome. So the Catskills, and then where does the kind of the Massachusetts, how does that all fit into it?
Yeah, my family would come to Cape Cod every summer. When I was a kid, we used to camp out here, and back then, would mainly fish in the kettle ponds, freshwater on Cape Cod, and normally really great fishing. But having started from a saltwater background and kind of learning a little bit more and more over time about saltwater fly fishing in Cape Cod, it pulled me in and it was kind of nothing I could do about it. It kind of took over my life. And when we moved to Cape Cod, I was in the process of kind of transitioning from a corporate career. I've been doing guiding, for saltwater and freshwater there, as kind of a part-time, thing that I was doing with my kids. And, my corporate job just sort of ended, and I was out of excuses at that point for not guiding fly fishing full time. So the next thing I knew, I had two boats and a captain's license, and we were off and rolling.
There you go. Never looking back then.
No, there's no looking back at this point, Dave. This is it.
That's cool. So I love the always the story on that because it goes back to your grandfather, right? You had this
Yeah.
connection and there was a fly rod along the way, and then it's like the planting the seed, and then eventually, years later you find yourself buying two boats and going all. I hear that story a lot. I'm not sure what it is. I think it's because, fly fishing kind of hooks you there somewhere along the way, and then
Yeah.
there's a life change and you have this opportunity, right, to go for it.
Yeah, somehow kind of I found the more people I talk to, the more clients I fish with, it's something that happens at one point in your life, and it's just sort of the right place, right time. And then from there, people just take off with it.
On DeMark Lodge offers a world-class experience with one of the finest rainbow trout and brown trout fisheries in the world. Their family-owned and operated Missouri River Lodge offers comfortable accommodations, delicious home-cooked meals, and personalized service that make you feel like family. Days on the water are capped off by appetizers, beverages, dinner, and stories on the back deck and around the campfire. Book your stay for an unforgettable fly fishing adventure where memories are made and the fish stories are real. You can head over right now to wetflyswing.com/ondemark. That's ONDEMARK on DeMark right now to book your magical Missouri River trip. I want to hear about a little bit. We've been talking a little bit about midges, the tailwaters, especially this time of year. You think of February, January, February, March, it's winter time. But the cool thing is on tailwaters, especially in these cold areas or around the country, you can still fish, right? Are you still fishing this time of year, like right in the middle of the winter when opportunities arise?
When opportunities arise, that's the key. Yeah, it's pretty darn cold, and you can run into a lot of problems with ice in the guides and things like that. But for sure, and in these tailwaters, because of the nature of tailwaters, they generally speaking don't have as much sort of bug life as maybe a freestone. So for sure, you're going to go with those small midges, maybe in, tandem or three at the end of your leader, and you're going to fish them slow, right? Because
Yeah.
the metabolism of trout at this point in time, given, I mean, some of our rivers are even frozen, those that don't move very much. So the metabolism of trout are pretty slowed down, and it's a pretty technical form of fishing. I think people, in my experience, who are fishing this time of year up in this neck of the woods are, their expectations are adjusted accordingly, but they're happy to be out. They're happy to be fishing. If they happen to hook a trout, well, that's a pretty nice thing, but the expectations are pretty low at this point.
So it's been a cold winter so far. I've heard there's been some cold temperatures.
Yeah, this one reminds me of those good old-fashioned New England winters when I was a kid. Relatively speaking, we've had more cold days and more sort of snow and ice this year than the most recent years. And it'll be interesting to see what happens, both in terms of how these rivers wake up over the course of the spring, and then if the ocean temperatures have cooled as a result, will that affect the striper migration? Hard to say.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I want to start to slowly take it out of here, and we're going to be thinking. I'm going to get some maybe some midge fishing tips out of here in a few minutes. But I want to do our fly fishing travel spotlight segment, and today it's presented by Mountain Waters Resort. So we're heading up to fish for Atlantic salmon up north of you, and this is out of like Newfoundland. And there's a cool area that we've been looking at, and it sounds like the fishing's pretty good up there. So I wanted to give one big shout out to that. The other cool thing about this, talking about history, which you have a lot of in your state, but this lodge was where Lee Wolf, some people that are maybe know about Lee, he's kind of an old, famous name. Iconic,
Yeah.
right? Well, this was the lodge he used to fly his plane up to and fish for
Wow.
Atlantic salmon. So we're going to be fishing some of the same pools that we're actually going to be staying in the same cabin, right? Essentially that he was in. So it's going to be
That's
this really,
amazing.
I know it's amazing. And for me, I'm a big steelhead angler. So it's going to be cool to finally compare steelhead Atlantic salmon. And so I want to give a big shout out to Mountain Waters Resort. So for you on the, the travel segment here, What is, we've talked about Massachusetts today. What is on your travel segment? Do you have other places that you've been to or you want to go to around the country, the world that you haven't been to yet, or maybe that you've been to, you want to go back?
Yeah, well, I know you're a steelhead guy.
Yeah.
I'm secretly a steelhead guy
Oh, nice.
myself.
Nice.
I'm in the early part of the spring. I'm going to head out to the Lake Erie tributaries. I go there every year in the fall. Never been there in the spring. But those fish, I mean, well, probably even better than I do, that they're just they're really something else. So
Yeah, so that's it. So you can travel in probably from, what is it, from Boston? It's like a 10-hour drive or something like that to get over there.
yeah, 8 to 10 hours, not so bad at all. Usually pretty solitary driving up through that northern part of New York, but yeah, worth the drive for sure.
Worth the drive. Are you going to be, I mean, yeah, and probably some of the same rivers we fished up there. So is that drive, what is that? Just hop on the road, throw in some music podcasts? Is this something you're
That's
doing on
right.
your own, or what do you got going there?
Throw the gear in the back of the truck, pop on some Bob Marley, and just go for it.
Just go for it. Nice. Awesome. And what's your on this is the start of our random, segment in the podcast, but are you doing the like hotel in it? Can't, well, you're probably not camping. It's in the fall, or what's that look like? Are you traveling
Yeah,
through? Yeah.
pretty cold, but just whatever cheap motel. And all you need is a place to lay your head down. You're going to be fishing otherwise. So
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Okay. So that's kind of the, like I said, kicking this off. That's a spot. I love that you're into steelhead. We obviously have a lot of steelhead episodes we've talked about. Let's hear a little bit. I want to hear about the boat. So you're talking about you've got this boat. We've done some episodes on like drift boats, but are you tearing your boat apart? Are you a big boat maker?
oh, I can't stop tinkering with boats. I mean, I guess properly I have three. I've got two saltwater boats and I've got a drift boat that I use for the rivers out here. And honestly, I wish I could stop with all this tinkering and tearing apart and putting back together. But
Right.
every time I fish one of these boats, I think about something we could change that would make it a better fishing platform. And so it's kind of irresistible to try to tweak it and make it better for my anglers.
Right. And is the boat you need there different from, say, if you're fishing in any other flats around? I mean, it sounds like maybe the high tides make it you need a more stable boat for that.
Yeah, no, you're making a good point. The flats boat I run is a 22-foot Hydrosports ocean skiff. And the way to think about it is that it's got a more of a V hull than a flat like a Chitham or something like that. And that's because, we're always going to be with a little bit of chop. And I want to be able to get out onto the bay, if it's maybe rolling 1.5, 2 foot, get out there and be able to get into some of these estuaries. And you can get into the estuary and you're not dealing with any kind of wave action at all. But the ride there and the ride back, you need a little bit of a V-hull to get you there.
Yep, yeah, because without the V hull, you're not doing well going through the waves.
No, you're getting, kind of brutalized on the way out and back.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. Well, let's maybe talk about that just before we start to kind of wrap this up on the tips. So we talked a lot, about the Cape Cod, and if people again want to follow up with you, we can send them out to sylvestreoutdoors.com. But yeah, let's hear some. You mentioned maybe a couple there on the midge fishing. What would be your main tailwater or for fishing midges? Is that the Deerfield?
Yeah, the Deerfield. There's another river. Folks will recognize it in central Massachusetts called the Swift River, and that river, very very clear water. You can see the fish; they can see you. So you're down to some pretty small, sizes of midges. Maybe you're in the 22, 24, or 26. You're
Oh wow,
sometimes
small.
it's real small. Yeah, and you're going to be fishing 6, 7x tippet, which is pretty tough to tie on a 22 if it's 30 degrees out.
Right.
So yeah, but that's pretty much the approach you have to take at this point.
You got to go small, and the reason you go small is because why it just the midges are smaller. Is that kind of why you're going small?
Yeah, it's more of a match the hatch thing.
Yeah, yeah. And then the techniques, are you typically fishing more down to the bottom or more emerging, or what's that look like?
Well, my personal preference is to have a fly low, have a fly sort of in the middle part of the water column. But I think you're concentrating probably on that point fly for the most part. these times of year. Yeah, those trout are sulking. It's cold,
Yeah,
and they're sulking down low, and yeah, you got to
got to
get
get
to
right in
them.
front of them.
Yeah, you got to pretty much bonk them on the head with it.
Right. Well, what's your nymphing? Is the nymphing like a Euro style or is it indicator? What does that look like?
I do a little bit of both. It kind of this time of year, I think probably your tight line nymphing is going to be your better bet. But again, if we're in the drift boat, we're going to be doing some indicator nymphing.
Indicator. Okay. Oh, right. So you have the drift boat, and the drift boat is like a full. Is that kind of where you just hop out on the water, even during the wintertime? You're using that boat if it's conditions are right.
For sure. Yeah. We do a couple of different trips. The Deerfields is usually just a fully float trip. We do a trip on the Ware River, which is a little closer into central Massachusetts. And that's a trip where we drift for a while, then we'll anchor up, allow our anglers to kind of wade certain sections of the river, and then drift down to the next pool.
Okay. And what's your drift boat you got there?
So I have a Avon Pathmaker. It's one of the it's an inflatable raft.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have a drift boat and a raft, or
That's
that's
my drift boat. Yeah, the the rivers here not really friendly for a drift boat like a Clacka or something like that. It gets super skinny in places. These rafts are really what folks use up here, and they're super comfortable.
yeah. So you're using a raft. You're not using a hard boat.
Right.
Yeah, I gotcha. But it's set up with the frame and all the casting
Exactly.
flying.
Yep.
Okay.
Casting platforms, so two anglers, one on the back, one on the front, and there's me shoveling water in the middle.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, perfect. I was going to say, yeah, you don't tend to see as many drift boats out east, right? There's some rivers, but mainly that's because, yeah, why is that on your rivers? Mainly because it's just a little too technical or rocky?
It gets really skinny, in some places that you've got to get through, which is, I mean, when I fish the Catskills, which I still do every year with my college buddy, and that's where you see a lot of drift boats and much fewer rafts. And I just think that, systems like the Delaware are just more amenable to those boats, different to the systems that we have up here.
Nice. Okay, well, a couple more and then we'll kind of get out of here. One thing I was thinking about was just, there's always changes in whether that's gear or technique, stuff like that. What is one, have you seen one big change in fly fishing maybe in the last year that's really, you think has made a big difference in your fishing? You can bring it back to the stripers if you want, but anything come to mind there?
Yeah, the thing that leaps to mind is that these fly rods are getting faster and faster. And I think, especially from a salt perspective, that's good because they're better able to handle the wind. The downside is if there is one, is that you have to adjust your casting technique between, a rod that's slower action versus a rod that's faster action. I get a lot of this in my casting lessons where a student will come, they've purchased this really fantastic rod. It's a super fast rod, and it's really difficult for them, to make a good cast until we break that cast down and really get them to understand how to use that particular rod.
Right. So you can take a person that gets a really fast action rod that doesn't have the skills yet, and you can take them and actually teach them to give them the skills to cast it.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes, just as an approach, if this would work, I'll step them back to a slower action rod and get them to really have a sense for how a rod loads and unloads, and then move them back to the faster action rod. And it's a matter of, adjusting that casting stroke, for that particular rod.
That's perfect. No, I love that this seems to keep coming up now that we've opened up the casting questions. And I think that I've heard this from some of the best, that's a big challenge, is that people get a rod that's too fast, because the industry is promoting faster and faster rods. But at the time, especially if you're newer, you're not that good at casting a fast action rod. So you actually want a slow action.
Yep.
Good. Well, this is great. Well, what would be a casting? Let's just take a casting tip. Like if somebody's listening now and we were putting this into a bunch of they could do like today. Like what could they do today as a casting? Maybe not even a tip. Maybe it's a casting exercise to kind of get ready. What would be one?
I think remember that over the course of a fly cast, whether it's your back cast or your forward cast, that rod is never moving at the same speed. It's either accelerating or decelerating, right? And that's really with the physics of getting that rod to bend or load. Loading and bending are the same thing, right? And then unloading. So maybe two things to remember is that you're always either accelerating or decelerating, never moving, at the same speed. And one of the things that I really find is a common casting error for clients or students is really bringing that rod to an abrupt stop. It's really that point in the cast at which, the moving line overtakes the stationary rod, and that's where the loop forms. So I tell people, make sure you stop the rod. Don't blow past that stopping point. Stop it and then lower it, but don't just lower it.
Yeah. Would there be something if somebody was getting ready for, let's just say, a saltwater trip that you would say, hey, you do this? I don't know if there's an exercise or something they can do in their lawn or on the water practicing.
I guess maybe the simplest way to get somebody ready that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of time is to think about how you would handle wind, because there's always going to be some, right? And if the wind is coming onto your casting arm, I think the simplest, most straightforward approach is to basically just tip that rod from vertical to horizontal, essentially moving that fly away from your body,
Oh,
right?
right. Yeah.
And the way I teach this in my advanced saltwater fly casting lessons is that, if you do that and you're not able to either make an accurate cast or you're not able to compensate for the wind enough, you got to take that rod and move it over to your other shoulder. And maybe now, rather than that wind blowing onto your casting arm, you've moved, the rod across your body. You're casting over your non-dominant shoulder, but you still need to be able to make that cast. In that case, the fly is now downwind from your body.
Right. So not necessarily changing your hand from a right to left hand, but just using your right and casting across your body.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean that's safe trips. I mean, sometimes you're out on the flats and you're constrained by where you can stand because of the water. You can't change the direction that the wind's coming in. Moving that rod from one side of your body and being able to cast it across your body has saved trips for me.
No, that is a good tip and really exercise you could do, right? You could be in your yard and instead of
Absolutely.
just casting like regular, you can practice casting across your body, like act like the wind's blowing against you and you got to cast over there. And then also the sidearm, right? You could practice that. You can just go out in your yard. And I think there is a couple of exercises. We've had some casting instructors who've been on, they've talked about doing where you have the rod just down to the side, like you said, and it's in front of you, and then you just cast back behind you.
Oh yeah, delivering in the back cast, that's super handy. It's a little bit more complicated than the first two examples that I mentioned, but if you have time, really handy skill to have, and that's sort of on the boat or on the flats or sort of wherever. But yeah, if you've got a real strong wind, you can't compensate in either of those two more sort of simple approaches. If you could turn around and deliver in your backcast, something I personally practice a lot because I think it's a really useful skill. But yeah, that's the third of the three, I think.
That is okay, perfect. And I just want to get a couple you mentioned at the start. I want to take it back here as we kind of wrap this up. The jujitsu. Let's talk about that. You mentioned it's kind of like fly fishing. So what's the connection? How are they similar?
It's so interesting. I think it's just something that over the course of time, my brain kind of absorbed. I think they're similar in that, they both have these sort of broad concepts that you have to think about, but the only way you can get better is really kind of working through a more and more detailed view of the broad concept. Both of them take a lot of practice. And the other thing that I think is interesting and similar is that neither of these two are about strength. It's about technique and timing. And that's maybe the biggest similarity that's occurred to me lately.
It has technique and time, right? So you could be a small or a big person and be good at jujitsu.
Absolutely. Lots of examples of that.
Gotcha. Okay. And what about sports? I always love to hear some sports questions. Are you a fan? You mentioned golf. Were there other sports out there other than golf?
I I've always been a fan of I don't know, martial arts and sort of combat sports. I was a long while ago. I was doing some amateur boxing here in Boston. My wife very rightly talked me out of that
Wow.
for all the right reasons.
And amateur
But
boxing means that you're still boxing like full people are
oh
hand.
yeah,
It's like boxing.
oh for sure, yeah, in front of crowds and all that stuff. It was,
Holy cow.
I mean, it was
Wow. What was that like? Did you ever get like knocked out or knocked down?
No, fortunately for me, I've never had either of those two experiences, but I will say that I remember my very first fight, it was in this gym and there's 200 some odd people
Wow.
there. There was a band playing in the
Holy
corner.
cow.
There was like 3 or 4 kegs
Oh
by the
my
door.
God.
And I was so nervous climbing into the ring, I thought I was going to pass out. But it's just,
Wow. What's
um,
that like when you get up into the ring? You're nervous, you get up there, and then you got to go and look across. Are you looking across at the guy that you're fighting and thinking, wow, that guy's bigger than me? And or what's that look like?
it was exactly the case in my very first fight. I fought a guy that, man, I think seemed like he was 3 feet taller than me. I'm sure he wasn't that much, but much taller, longer. And it's all by weight class, right? So that's kind of how you get matched up. And I remember thinking to myself, this is going to be a problem.
Really? So what happens? The bell rings. What is your tactic to stay alive?
The bell rings, and this particular fight is kind of funny, right? So I'm relatively short. This guy was long, had a long reach. So anytime I tried to get close to him, he would throw jabs and keep me on the outside. And that was pretty much how the first round went. So I went back to my corner between the first and the second rounds, and my cornerman says, "Look, this is what you do. Put your hands in front of your face and just walk straight at them until you back them up in the ropes, and then just get in the inside and go to work." And, I came out the second round, they rang the bell. I walk into this guy, landed a few punches on the inside, and the rest of the fight was me chasing him around the ring.
No kidding. Oh, wow.
Because- yeah, because I don't think he didn't want any more of that, so he just wanted to kind of stay away.
So you were hitting him. You're like going in the ribs and sort of stuff, like those
Yeah,
punches.
and
Yeah.
then my cornerman said, "Look, you're going to take some shots on the way in. You just got to expect that. But once you get inside of his elbows, you're home."
That's it. Wow. So how many rounds was the fight supposed to be?
This one was 3. Most of these amateurs rounds are 3 3-minute rounds.
So you went 3 rounds and then you guys basically it chose a winner. Is that how that works?
Yeah, yeah. I think I ended up winning that one. But man, I got tired chasing that guy.
Right.
I don't know.
Wow.
Amateurs, we don't know what we're doing. We're just in there having fun, and
Oh, totally. Well, it just seems like, I mean, the fighting, right, is interesting because it is entertaining to watch. You go back to like Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, any of the greats, like watching those fights, but it's brutal. It's brutal
Oh,
too. At the same time, you've got like Muhammad Ali, all these fighters are getting brain damage, and stuff,
exactly.
right? So it's this brutal thing. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And I was getting into my 40s, and I remember my wife looking at me going, "Hey, man, I don't think this is a long-term thing for you. Why don't you pick something else?" I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay. How about jujitsu? That's good." So that's where I went.
There you go. Cool. All right. And what about the football? I hear you hear a lot about. I remember the Tom Brady days and all that stuff. Are you a big football fan or other sports?
Well, living here, I mean, you have to be. This has been like title town for, whether it's the Red Sox or the
Oh
Bruins,
yeah.
Celtics or the Patriots. We've had, some really great years. Right now we're in a little bit of a dry spell. I mean, I'm not disparaging the Celtics. They won the championship last year. I'm just
Oh, they
not
did.
a big, yeah, a fantastic year after having built, I think, seasons for it. I've never been a basketball fan. I'm more of a football fan, I think.
Yeah, yeah, I gotcha. So you were loving the Tom Brady years.
Oh, it was great, dude. Winning all those Super Bowls. Absolutely.
That's good. Cool. Well, anything else before we get out of here on, we're talking if people are interested in checking out your trips, anything we missed today on anything?
Not really. I would just put this out there for folks that are interested in learning all things sort of fly fishing. I do work as the education committee chair for Fly Fishers International.
Oh, cool.
And, I'm not sure actually how familiar most people are with FFI or the amount of resources that are available. It's a vast amount. And so, yeah, I would just put a plug in there for FFI. Come check it out. There's something there for you.
Good. We'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. Yeah, we're doing some cool stuff. I think in moving ahead with FFI too, they've got a ton. Like we said, casting is a huge part of that, but all sorts of other stuff. Good. Well, we'll send everybody out till we said at the start, sylvestreoutdoors.com. And then same thing. Remind us again on Instagram. Where can they find you?
Same thing. It's handles Sylvestre Outdoors.
Perfect. All right, George. Well, thanks again. This has been great today. Hopefully we'll be in touch with you in the future and maybe get on the water. I'd love to check out those flats sometimes. And yeah, definitely. Thanks for all your time.
Absolutely, Dave. Thank you.
All right, quick call to action for you. If you're interested in stripers, albacore, maybe even some trout fishing in the winter, check in with George. You can do that right now at his website. We'll have a link in the show notes. Let him know you found this podcast there. Also, if you haven't yet, you can follow this show. Just click that plus button on any app you're on right now. I want to give you a quick heads up. Next episode, going live Monday, is going to be a big one. We got CJ, Chad Johnson's back, and he's going to be going deep as always on Streamers. Plus, we got a big bonus surprise that we've been talking about. Stay tuned and subscribe so you get updated on that one. And that's about all we have now. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you have a great afternoon, great evening, or a great morning. And we'll talk to you and see you on that next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.